Welcome to the Barnet and District Beekeepers Association lecture on swarming, control and prevention. My name is Simon Dover and I've been a member of the BDBK since 2017. Since completing the course back then, I have so far successfully navigated my way around all the trials and tribulations of keeping a couple of colonies. It's been a lot of fun with much to learn, especially when the bees present certain challenges such as swarming. In this lecture, I'll be providing you with some insight and good practice as to what to expect, look for, and do when the time comes. In today's lecture, we will cover the reasons for swarming, what is swarming, how to recognize queen cells, how to prevent a swarm, how to control a swarm, a simple method of swarm control, swarm collection, hiving a swarm. And this may seem like a lot of information at the moment, but it will eventually sink in, especially when you're out in the apiary and getting hands-on experience. And just out of interest, the picture you can see there was actually the first swarm that I encountered, and that was in the training apiary, and that was a real joy to experience, especially when my teachers were having to control it and put it in a box. We were all incredibly fascinated by that. As I'm sure you will be when you first encounter your own swarms. So here we're going to look at some of the reasons for swarming and why they do it. So swarming is actually just a natural way in which bees reproduce, and it shows that the colony is doing well. And there are lots of bees, stores, and they're in good health. It's also when there is overcrowding as well in the hive, and it can be when it becomes too cramped or restricted, the bees' ability kind of to expand is hindered. They want to grow, as all kind of natural things do. Overcrowding also means that the queen's substance, so it's a pheromone she produces, can't freely pass around the hive, and this pheromone calms the bees. So when it's not around, they can get agitated, and hence they can want to swarm as well. The colony may be unbalanced. By this I mean they can sense something is not quite right, and most likely the queen may have become damaged or she's dead. Or the queen has got old or is getting old, and after about 2 years the queen's substance may become less potent. Or they feel they need to abscond, so the hive may be diseased and it might not be fit for their for them to live in anymore, and because of that they up sticks and they leave. So what is a swarm? Here I'll explain what a swarm is, the different types of swarms, and what's going on in the hive leading up to the colony deciding to swarm. So swarming usually takes place in May and June, possibly early July, but keep an eye out those of kind of possible swarms or kind of queen cells, as you'll learn about, in August too, although these are likely to be supersedures, and that's going to be explained in a bit as well. So preparations, and I mean preparations, the bees make preparations for swarming, and it usually starts about a week before the actual event, hence weekly inspections. The queen will lay fertilized eggs in queen cells, and the larvae are fed royal jelly by the workers to produce queen larvae. These are then sealed, and once they have been sealed, the old queen is ready to fly off with about half of the workers and set up a new colony elsewhere. This is what's known as a prime swarm. During this time, scout bees would have been out, and they would have been kind of checking out potential sites for new nests. Here you can see a bee development chart, and it's really important to learn the developmental stages of the bees, and especially that of the queen, because after about 3 days of being laid, the egg in a queen cell will hatch. About 8 to 9 days after that, the cell is sealed, and any time after that, the swarm is able to fly. This is why there's around about a kind of 9-day inspection cycle. Once the swarm leaves the hive, it will alight on a nearby bush or a kind of tree or fence or other places, as you'll see later. And the scout bees will then inspect the site they have found and return to the swarm. They'll dance on the surface of the swarm to give information about the new nest sites. Eventually, they will come to a consensus indicating that indicating only kind of one distance or direction. The swarm will then fly off to the new site. They will enter the new site and start to build a nest to create a new colony. So a cast swarm, we've talked about a kind of a prime swarm, which is the first one that kind of leaves. A cast swarms are subsequent swarms from that swarm colony that are accompanied by a queen, but in this case, it's usually a virgin queen. Casts are naturally smaller than the prime swarm and seem to be produced when the colony feels sufficiently opulent to produce more than one extra colony in a year. So who's in the swarm? Well, naturally you have the queen, and then you've got worker bees, which consist of kind of mostly young nurse and house bees and a few old foragers. And there are some drones, but they're not kind of any major part, as you'll learn later. So who's left behind? Well, you've got all the eggs, you've got the larvae, you've got the sealed brood, the younger nurse bees and a portion of house bees, and a charged queen cell, of course. And because so many workers leave with the swarm, the consequences for the remaining colony are that it's much smaller and will produce hardly any excess honey in the season. And once a colony has swarmed, there is a danger that it will swarm again and cast and further reduce its strength. Under exceptional circumstances, a colony may continue to produce casts until there are virtually no bees left in a colony. Swarming is bad for the beekeeper, but it's also bad for the public as well, as you'll find out. So this chart hopefully kind of indicates the impact of swarming. And you can see with the black line, which indicates the full colony, and the red line, which is the swarmed colony or the portion of that. And you can see this section here where there are foragers lost from the parent colony. That's a significant loss. So the swarming season, as I said, is usually usually at the end of April and the end of June. Bees will only swarm when there is a good chance that the virgin queen left behind will be mated. And there are many drones about during the swarming season. And you can see quite clearly from the chart that the impact this has on the swarm has on the size of the colony, and also on any potential honey you kind of were hoping to take that year. I mean, in a good season, the colonies can reach in excess of 70 to 80,000 bees at the height of summer, and the flow is when all the nectar is out, and that's exactly when you want the most amount of bees to be kind of foraging. So the loss felt with a swarm is great, especially when it can be reduced to roughly about kind of below 20,000. So how to recognize queen cells? So there are kind of early signs that you can see. You can guess that it could be swarming season, but there are kind of actual physical signs that you can see. So as you become more accustomed to the look of a brood frame and their orderly hexagonal patterns, you will soon recognize the addition of various types and positions of queen cells and cups. These will be exampled over the next couple of slides. So here's an example of a typically orderly brood frame. I mean, I say orderly, but you look in your hive and they've chewed everywhere, and it's never as kind of neat as this usually. It usually has a lovely kind of biscuit color on the cappings, and these are all the brood cappings here. And occasionally you can see drone brood, which kind of protrude out here. So you can see some here on the bottom left and the bottom right, and then it's surrounded by their stores. So if you see a queen cell, as you're going to be shown in the next few slides, you'll see that they clearly stand out. A couple of instances, they actually sneakily hide them, but we'll get to that too. So here are a couple of examples of queen cells being formed. And for a prime swarm, these will be kind of typically found in the lower part of the frames or up the sides, but most likely tucked under where the bees have chewed on the bottom of the frame. And this was to kind of create a gap or a kind of a sneaky hidden place, as I've found and not spotted them in the past. Here are a few examples of kind of a capped queen cells. And remember, it takes about 8 days for the cell to be capped from the moment the egg is laid. And a typical queen cell looks like quite a lot like a peanut with the ridges going down there. And this is a kind of a nicely formed queen cell. And you can see they're usually at the kind of the bottom here. So there's plenty of space for it as well. Yeah, and I said as a good one is kind of, as you'll learn, it's kind of long and drawn out. And ones that you've got to look out for ones you should be keeping, which are in a kind of good position without kind of risk of being knocked when inspecting. So we have also, there's different types of queen cells as well. They may look the same, but the position of them or the location is a great indicator of what type of cell you are seeing. In this case, it's kind of most likely a kind of an emergency queen cell. And for these, you can expect to see this along with lots of other ones on the actual face, on the center of the frame. And this is in response to the queen being killed, dying, or removed by the beekeeper. As opposed to purposefully created queen cells, the emergency is formed from a pre-existing egg, and that can be up to a 3-day-old larva. And the appearance of the queen cell is therefore hooked, and the quality of the queen produced is also inferior. There are also supersedure cells, again, can be built on the face of the comb, but this time fewer in number and better quality, size. And they occur when the old queen is still present and laying, and it may be a result of the colony being unhappy with her. It could be she is failing or getting old. Supersedure normally occurs in autumn, when the new queen mates and returns to start laying eggs, sometimes alongside her mother. Eventually, the old queen will be killed or starved by the workers. Yeah, they can be cruel, but it's necessary. The observant beekeeper may only realize that supersedure has occurred when a new unmarked queen is found in the colony. And here you can see what is possibly a play cup. And play cups can be found throughout the year. And they're usually found at the bottom or edges of the frame, and these look a lot like acorns. And in most cases, these are likely to be taken, they're not unlikely to be taken any further or drawn out, as we say. It's always best to check if an egg or larvae is present, however. So what's inside a queen cell, or a play cup, if you think it's a play cup and it's actually a queen cell? So you found what you think is a queen cell being formed. What should you be looking for inside? And a careful peep should reveal either an egg or a larvae swimming in royal jelly. And I must stress, caution should be taken not to damage the cell. As you can see in here, on the left-hand side, you can see a tiny grub there, a larvae, and you've got to look kind of quite closely. It's usually quite good to bring a torch if the sun isn't with you. And you can see here on the right-hand side, there's a kind of close-up of the larvae swimming in royal jelly. So prevention, what's all the fuss about swarming, and why should we prevent them? As shown earlier, the loss of a swarm can impact your honey crop, but probably more important is consideration for the public. A swarm, although relatively harmless, can frighten the public. And it's your duty as a beekeeper to prevent this, and also to collect them when required. Swarming is a natural process for the bees, but there are ways in which we can let this happen under controlled methods without letting the bees fly off and become a nuisance. So, how can you do this? Well, there's regular inspections. That's kind of weekly or every 9 days, looking carefully for signs of for swarm preparation, whether there are queen cups, cells, larvae in them. Make sure you have a young queen. Kind of queens 2 years older, you might find that their colony who have been behaving start to misbehave and start to make swarm cells. So have a queen from a reputable local supplier that exhibits a low tendency to swarm. And this is when a member of the local our association can help. Make sure that there is room in the brood space for the queen to lay. So ensure that the brood space has plenty of room for her to expand. I mean, that's what they want to do. Running out of room kind of rings alarm bells for the bees, and they'll want to swarm. So make sure you've got fresh, clean comb in the brood chamber so that they can use every available cell for rearing brood. Also, give them room to store nectar for making honey. So pop on another super. Ensure that there are plenty of supers on there. It's around about 2 to 3 on the hive during the swarming period, so that the bees have space to process their nectar, and that also reduces the pressure for space in the brood nest. Also, know what to do when queen cells are seen with eggs or larvae in them, which is what you're learning about now. And if after inspection there are queen cells in the colony, you will need to consider whether to remove the queen cells or prepare for swarm using a recognized method. You can also mark and clip the queen. Clipping the queen as this will ensure a swarm cannot leave the colony until a new queen has been produced. This doesn't prevent a swarm from happening, but it does mean that the swarm doesn't get lost. It returns to the hive. Also, look out for drones. That's a good tip I learned last year. So if a colony's drones are emerging, then you have at least about 2 weeks until they are sexually mature, and then your colony is unlikely to swarm before then. So clipping the queen and the effect on swarming. Clipping the queen basically means, in the little diagram I've got here, it's removing a portion of one of her wings to stop her from flying too far anyway. She'll try and she'll drop to the ground. So, so why clip a queen? And put simply, it buys us more time and prevents the swarm from completely leaving for a short period of time anyway. As mentioned before, there is a need to inspect at least every 9 days to be ahead of the development and emerging cycle of the new queen. You, like most of us, will probably inspect every 7 days, but adverse weather or unexpected delay in being able to inspect can happen. Clipping the queen increases the inspection time to around about 10 days, as the queen cannot fly with the swarm, and by the time it takes to raise a new queen to swarm again, an inspection will be made. Having an unclipped queen means a swarm could issue 4 days after the last inspection if the urge to raise a queen was already present, since a 5-day-old larva can be converted into swarm cells, like emergency queen cells. And a swarm can issue on day 9 as such cells are sealed. So a queen with a clipped wing will generally swarm later than an unclipped queen, potentially giving you a few extra days between inspections. So there's a couple of charts here to show the benefit of clipping a queen. And this one here shows where so the following 2 slides explain the benefit of clipping the queens, and this one, so these are based on a kind of 9-day inspection. And this slide assumes that no queen cells are present upon inspection. And as you can see, after 9 days, the colony decides to swarm. Okay. With the clipped queen, the swarm returns and has to wait until the virgin queen emerges on day 16 before being able to swarm again. So they're not going to go anywhere if they haven't got the queen. The reason why they leave is because they're quite happy that they have everything they need in order to set up a new colony. Without the queen, there's no point in them being out of the hive. So they're going to come back in and they're going to have to wait for a new queen to be formed. So the unclipped queen and the followers on day 9 make a break for it, as you can see here. There's no reason why they shouldn't leave, because they have their queen. She isn't lost. They're all set. So this slide assumes queen cells were present on inspection, but they've been destroyed. With a strong swarming instinct, the bees decide to create an emergency queen cell from a 3 to 5-day-old larvae. Again, the clipped queen fails to leave. Fly with the swarm, so they return and wait it out until the virgin queen emerges. From the unclipped queen and her followers, they only have to wait about 9 days before they can potentially swarm again. And the 3 to 5-day-old larvae can be sealed in a further 3 to 4 days. If anything, this highlights the importance of regular inspections, especially in the swarming season. This will all become clear when you've had experience as well. So swarm control. So in order to have control over a swarm, it's important to know the 3 leading players in the situation. There's the brood, there's the flying bees, and then there's the queen. Drones, other than being an early indicator of a colony being ready to swarm and a few leaving with a swarm, play no part at all. So how do these come into the equation? So to control a swarm, we undertake what is known as an artificial swarm. And there are numerous methods of creating an artificial swarm, but all of these involve the separation of one of the 3 parts, either the brood, flying bees, or queen. And the following slides show a method for undertaking an artificial swarm known as the Pagden. And this method separates the brood from the queen and flying bees. Other methods separate one other from the 2. So it would either be the queen from the brood and flying bees, the brood from the queen and flying bees, or the flying bees from queen and brood. So the Pagden. And so this is a method of artificial swarming, and you will become very familiar with this as it's a good one to learn. It's the kind of introductory one to learn. So on a lovely summer's day in June, you stroll into the apiary and begin your inspection. A few brood frames in, and bam, you discover a queen cell. Stop, think, what's been taught to you? Are you ready? Luckily, you have all your spare kit, as you were actually anticipating such a thing to happen, which is unlike me, who usually rushes back home and phones around to cobble together the various additional hive components. Here you can see what will be a brood box filled with brood frames, only 3 showing. There you go, just to highlight where the queen cells are and where the queen is. So this would normally be completely filled. And this hive is known as the parent colony. And the following are the steps needed to do a Pagden. So what you would do is you would remove the super that was on top, if you're lucky enough to have honey coming in. So you'd remove the super, and then you'd move the parent colony at least 1 meter away onto a new stand. So moving the parent colony splits the trilogy. So the trilogy being the brood, the flying bees, and the queen. So one of them has now been taken out of the equation. Okay. All the flying bees will return to the old site. So because you've got your parent colony on a new site, there's actually nothing there at the moment, but there will be. And all the flying bees who are out foraging come back to that specific spot. So by doing that, and also by reorientating the entrance, you doubly confuse all the flying bees, because there will probably still be some flying bees present in the parent colony. So they're going to fly out of there and they're going to go back to what they think is their original hive. So that's confused them all. So you've now got the queen and the brood all in a new spot and on a new stand. Next, what you're going to do is on the original stand, so where your hive was and where the flying bees think it is, you're going to put an empty brood box, and we'll call this whole brood box the artificial swarm, the AS, and you'll put a floor. Next, you're going to rifle through the parent colony. You're going to locate the queen and move her onto the frame of brood, move her and her frame of brood that she's on into the new hive on the original site. So what you've done now is you split up the trilogy again. It's really important, though, that on that frame of brood that you've found the queen, you can move her onto another frame of brood if you want, but what is really important is that there are no queen cells present. So it's just a nice frame of brood with the queen on it, and you pop it into the artificial swarm. Now comes some difficult choices. In the parent colony, which is the one on the right with all the queen cells in it, you've now got to select the very best queen cell. And as if you remember earlier, having a look at that kind of nice looking queen cell, and over time you'll learn kind of what a decent queen cell is. You've got to make sure that it's big, it's well formed, but it's also in a good position on the frame. So what you've got to do is you've got to remove all the other queen cells on that. So once you've selected it, remove all the other queen cells. Some people decide to leave 2 queen cells just in case. And these are usually, if you leave 2, they're usually found on the same frame or kind of close together. And then you've got to rummage through the rest of the brood box here and make sure that there are no other queen cells. So it's either you just keep 1 or 2, and there can't be any others. Once you've selected that queen cell or queen cells, mark that frame, and we usually do that with a drawing pin, so that you know exactly where your selected queen cell is. So when you're going back and you're checking in a few weeks' time, that you know to be very careful of that frame. On the artificial swarm, so the one on the left, you then have to fill that with frames of foundation or drawn comb. Then place a queen excluder on top of the brood box and then pop the super on. And this will give the flying bees, who have now been kind of drafted into, who were foragers, now they have to kind of have a new role, and that's to kind of draw foundation, and that the super on there will give them the resources they need to help draw out that kind of the comb on the foundation. After that, you go back to your parent colony. This is all in the same day. We haven't shifted today, so it can be a quite an experience and things to kind of remember and do. So on the parent colony, you add feeds to the parent colony. It depends. They might have, because they still have all the stores in there as well. Remember, this colony was doing really well. They've got lots of stores, lots of brood. Things are going really well. So you might not need to feed, but just kind of be ready to feed. And unlike the artificial swarm and the original stand, they do not have foragers to bring in much kind of needed food. So that's why, possibly one reason why you would need to feed. Then you can close up that hive. So what happens next? So you've done all that. You're exhausted. You've had an amazing experience discovering queen cells, and you've rushed around, and you've kind of made this this procedure. So what happens next? So over the day, all the flying bees who have been out foraging will return to the artificial swarm on the original site, as well as any flying bees remaining in the parent hive on the new stand. The artificial, the parent colony has a queen cell still to emerge, and it's still got all of the brood as well. Then after around 14 days, the new queen should have, oh, she's swapped over. Yeah, no, she's here. Sorry. Here we go. The new queen in the parent colony, I've kind of swapped it around. The new queen, she should have emerged. So she does need time to mate and return to start laying. And this period of around 3 weeks can be excruciating, as you'll be desperate to know she's returned, and also that she's been successful and has begun laying. You've got to be patient. I've seen lots of beekeepers kind of losing it because you just need to be patient. So to recap, in our hive, in our new hive, the artificial swarm, on the original site, we have our old queen, and she's still able to lay after 2 days. Remember, what I should have said is before kind of swarming, they would have kind of slimmed her down so she's able to fly. After about 2 days, she would be fed and she'll be kind of fattened up again, and she'll be able to start laying again after 2 days. You've got all the flying bees, which are back in the new hive. You've got a super on there as well. There's a queen excluder between the brood box and the super to stop the queen going up. And there's lots of work to do for the bees in there. They've got to draw out all the comb, which takes a lot of work. They are not thinking about swarming anymore. You've got one frame of sealed brood, which is about to be born. You've got no queen cells, so they really can't swarm. So this whole colony here is acting like it has swarmed. So it's quite happy and it's settling down. There's no swarming instinct. You should check roughly in around a week's time to check that there are no queen cells present, just in case. And what's happening in the parent colony on the new stand? So you've checked for a kind of good queen cell that isn't sealed. You've marked the frame and replaced safely in position. You've removed all the other queen cells unless you need a queen cell for another colony. You can take that out. They've got enough food stores. That should be enough. Kind of 2 frames full, but if short, you can kind of feed them after a few days. And you've checked and removed emergency queen cells in 7 days as well. So what can go wrong? Well, the old queen may still want to swarm, so check in a week for signs of that. If 2 queen cells left, a cast swarm may emerge. You've got to reduce the number of, if you want to reduce the number of bees to help prevent any casts like this, you can do what we call the Hedden variation. And so the Hedden variation is placing, after 7 days, you shift the parent colony to the other side of the artificial swarm, and you just keep swapping it backwards and forwards kind of after 7 days, and that just depletes the amount of kind of bees in the parent colony. There we go. So whilst doing an artificial swarm, there was that process of actually having to find the queen, and that can be quite difficult, especially in the kind of the height of summer there and kind of swarming season. There are thousands of bees in there, and to spot her whilst all the bees are up in your face as well can be quite tricky. But here are some ways in which kind of finding her can be made easier. So one is if she's marked, by which we mean we get a chalk pen and we can mark the back of her, which makes her easier to spot amongst the bustle in a busy hive. Also, if the bees are flying, if the kind of bees are flying already left and there are fewer bees in the hive, making it easier to spot. Another method which is quite good and demonstrated here is if you pair the frames together, so you split them in two, you will take one of them out to make kind of a 10 in there. You pair them together, wait a few minutes for them to settle down. And what this does is it stops the queen being able to run all over the hive. She'll try and hide in the kind of the dark spots. So if you've just got two frames together, it means she's got less kind of places to run. So it makes it a lot easier when you just pick up those kind of two frames individually. So once she's located, you can safely move her on a frame into the new hive. So an alternative to doing the artificial swarm in a kind of in a full size hive is actually doing it in a nucleus box. And this is essentially the kind of the same method, but it's usually used for kind of a smaller kind of temporary hive with it's usually used when you temporarily want to kind of house them and you're going to either move them to a completely different site or kind of just hold on to her for kind of security reason, but it's a security measure really. I should explain what a nucleus box is if you haven't heard of one or come across that. It's essentially a kind of a smaller hive or a box with 6 frames instead of 11. And also putting them into a nucleus box can temporarily kind of reduce the congestion in your hive as well until you decide what to do with them. And so it is pretty much exactly the same. So as you can see on the left, we've got, you locate your original queen along with kind of 3 frames of sealed brood. You transfer those into a nucleus box, ensuring no queens or cells are present on those frames. What you do then is shake around 3 frames of additional bees from the original hive into the nuke. And then add a good frame of stores and also a frame of foundation or drawn comb. You do not feed for a few days to prevent robbing as well. A good thing to do is close up the entrance of the nuke with some grass to prevent them from leaving for a little while. That will eventually wither, and then that will help the bees release the bees, but do check, as I've known that not to work and the bees be trapped in there. In the original hive, what you do, remove all but the best queen cell, you mark that with a pin, you shake other frames to ensure there are no other queen cells left, and you leave the queen to emerge, mate, and begin laying. So that part is like the Pagden that we've looked at. So you have to kind of decide what to do when the time comes, and you should learn one method for swarm control and master it before kind of trying any others. Otherwise things get really confusing if you're not confused already. If the weather turns bad and new queens do not mate, think about uniting. So also if you only want one colony, then you can wait a while and then you can unite them again. Or if you want to make an increase, split the colony. You can place a frame with a sealed queen cell and each just before the queen emerges. So I'll let you kind of mentally digest that. We will be given time to understand that and come face to face with all the equipment and the procedures and things like that. But it is kind of worth it's worth kind of going over that and really kind of trying to commit that, because on the day, all hell breaks loose. And if you're a kind of a beginner, as I was at the time, you really are up in a flap, and you're kind of looking on the internet and calling around and trying to figure out exactly what to do. So we shall move on now to swarm collection, and the next few slides give you a brief insight into how to kind of collect a swarm. And this is something that we stress you practice with an experienced beekeeper, and always take out the necessary precautions. So as mentioned earlier, a swarm will kind of usually kind of fly out, and it will rest nearby. It will go onto kind of trees, hedges, posts. The scout bees will also be kind of looking for kind of suitable spots, and then they'll be deciding, yeah, that's perfect. There's a kind of a collective agreement with them all before they kind of fly off, and then they cluster again. So popular sites could be kind of chimneys, roof spaces, compost buckets, etc. But they'll always surprise you. So how collecting a swarm kind of plays out? Well, it's usually kind of initiated by a member of the public who phones the police or kind of local authority. And the police or local authority will then phone kind of a recognized beekeeper in the area, usually from our association or another association, who will then find a beekeeper that is able to collect the swarm. And the member of the public is then phoned. We'll phone them up, and we'll give them our name and when to expect us and all those details. And so when we arrive, we are all of the understanding that kind of the swarms are kind of quite valuable, because they by law belong to the person that collects them. So if you go along and you collect that swarm, that is yours. So potentially you could kind of sell it, or you could give it to someone in the association, or you can keep it for yourself. So and they're very useful to kind of build up kind of stocks, or just reinforce your existing stocks. So some beekeepers from associations kind of do charge for collecting swarms. Other people see it as a public service and consider the bees reward enough. But it's very important that you get permission off the landowner to enter the property, and you shouldn't collect a swarm without express permission. Some also get a signed document to indemnify themselves against consequential damage that collecting the swarm might cause. And if the swarm is in an awkward place, it could result in personal or property damage. The beekeeper will usually contact a professional swarm controller who has specific accidents and public liability insurance. So these are all things to consider. You're not going to just kind of rush out there and kind of collect a swarm, because there are lots of kind of potential consequences. So you are going to collect the swarm. So you've obtained appropriate insurance, you've got the permission from the landowner, ensure the public are kept away from the swarm. You want to retrieve the queen. Once you've done that, as you will see, the rest will follow. And the rest of the items on the list here, I'm going to cover over the next couple of slides. So basically, when you've got to the swarm, you'll have all of the kit with you, and this kit usually consists of a container, which can be a skep, or a nuke box, or a cardboard box. All have to kind of come with a lid or some way of kind of sealing it, and then a block for the entrance, and that kind of helps kind of raise it. A bit of string, or kind of not a bit, but a considerable amount of string would be quite good. A large sheet or loose woven material, a pair of secateurs or loppers, a bee brush or goose feather, a smoker, and your bee suit, and that should kind of see you good. I'm going to play a video now, which should give you some indication of what it's like to pick up the swarm. So let me just play that now, and we'll recap after.
Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company, and welcome to another Beekeeping Basics. We've just come through a period of fairly cool weather, and we've had just one afternoon of increasing temperatures, and the phone started ringing, and we've got swarms appearing all over the place, including some of our own bees. We've just come down to one of our remote sites and discovered that one of the colonies here has swarmed. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to just show you what a swarm looks like and how we're going to recover it, and hopefully at the end of the day put them into a new hive and have another colony. So we'll take the camera up to the swarm, which is just above my head over here, and then we're going to shake them into a skep, which is this. It's quite an old skep, and we'll just shake the bees into this, and then turn it upside down onto a sheet, and then we'll leave it for the bees just to settle into the skep for the rest of the day, and then I'll come back later this evening, and then we'll put them into either a nuke or a full-size hive. Okay, so here's the swarm. It's a reasonable size for us. So this is a prime swarm, so it's the first swarm that's come out of the hive that we've got here, and we're going to just go up into this little canopy of hawthorn and shake them into the skep. The queen should then fall into the skep as well, and once you've got the queen, you're fairly safe to assume that the rest of the bees are going to follow, and then we'll bring the skep down onto the floor where we've got a cloth laid out, and then we'll just invert the skep onto the floor so that the bees can hopefully just settle in there. And then later this afternoon we'll come back and we'll either put them into another hive here, or we'll move them to another apiary. So I'm just going to pop my hood up. We don't need the smoker here, and we'll shake them down into the skep. Okay, so there's the skep on the floor, and the bees are now inside the basket, and hopefully we've got the queen in there. You have to shake it fairly vigorously to make sure you get all the bees off, which I'm fairly certain we've done. And we'll now leave them for a short while to allow them to kind of acclimatise themselves to the skep, and then we can come back later and hopefully either take them away or house them in a nuke or a full-size hive. Okay, so we've come back to the apiary. It's early evening and the bees have settled into the skep. And what we're going to do now is to attempt to run them up into the nuke box. We've only got a nuke box here. We've been out fairly busy all day inspecting, and we're down to just the one nuke box left. So I would normally run them up into a full-size hive, but we'll run them into this nuke box. So we're going to put a piece of board down in front of the nuke box so that it slopes up to the entrance of the nuke box. And then we're going to pick up the skep and basically shake all of the bees out of the skep onto the piece of board, which will look quite dramatic. And then hopefully over a period of a few minutes, they'll then orientate themselves up the slope, go and take a look at the nuke box, decide that that's where they want to rehome themselves, and then we'll try and show you them marching up the board and into the nuke box, which, when it works, looks quite spectacular. So fingers crossed, and hopefully we can show that to you today. So this is the queen just here. Okay, well, we can see that the bees have certainly found their way into the entrance. With the nuke box, they do have a tendency to just clog up the entrance a little bit. So sometimes if you just move the bees away from the entrance, it allows access into the nuke box, but also it allows the other bees to sense the queen's pheromone. And then, as you can see, they tend to march up fairly quickly. So we're almost done here. We're going to allow these bees just to settle down. And it looks as if they're fairly well established into their new home. So at the end of a fairly long day, we've managed to collect several swarms. We've checked a high percentage of the bees that we've got, and everything seems to be going okay. We've obviously got the swarm over here that we've run up the board, and they're now pretty much settled on the front of that nuke box. We could have done really with having a full-size hive, and then they'd have all gone into the hive without any problem. But when all you've got is a nuke box, that's all you can use. But I hope you found that interesting. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do consider subscribing. And don't forget, we've got a Facebook group, which is Stuart's Beekeeping Basics. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up.
So hopefully that was insightful. So just to recap, you set up your large sheet under or close to the cluster. These are some things that Stuart there didn't kind of show, but usually a good idea to kind of set up that sheet under where you find the cluster. You take your skep or other box and you position it directly under the cluster. We are presuming that, like Stuart there, you have found it neatly in a bush. And then you confidently shake or brush the bees into your skep or other box. You might need to cut the branch to get access, and also to allow for kind of better shaking, hence the kind of secateurs or kind of shears. So when you're happy with when all the bees are in there, you especially the kind of the queen, you get the majority. You're most likely to have the queen in there as well. You invert the skep onto the sheet, and you can kind of move that to a kind of safer place, but usually kind of leave it where it is. And you use a block just to kind of raise the edge of the inverted skep, and that allows access, and that's access to all the other kind of the bees flying around. So that they can smell the queen, and they can also, all the other kind of the bees around are fanning and producing a pheromone to attract other bees in, just to kind of let them know where they've gone. So it's usually a good idea to smoke the area where they had previously been. If it was up on a branch, then kind of smoke that area, and that will hopefully dissipate the pheromones that are kind of left behind. And again, you should kind of leave till late, kind of afternoon or early evening, but in which time all the bees should be in the box. And so, yeah, they would kind of send out all their pheromones to attract all the stragglers, and they should start to kind of settle down, especially if the kind of the queen is present. And when you're happy that all has settled down, you grab the sheet and you wrap it securely around the skep. And what you can do, if you're lucky enough to have it happen in your own apiary, then that's kind of really handy. But if it's out in public, then you ensure that your cloth that you've got is kind of securely fastened around your skep, and that's where you bring in the string. And then after that, taking it to your kind of desired location. As you can see, Stuart there had kind of run his bees up into his hive, and I'll explain about running and kind of moving them into a hive on the next slide.
Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company.
He's trying to speak again. So, having captured your swarm with it contained in a nuke or collection box, it's time to transfer them to the hive. And so the best time really to do this is in the evening, to ensure the bees settle and resist the urge to continue looking for a suitable location to move on. And so there are generally two methods used to hive your bees. The first one, as was just shown, is running them in. And here you lay a board or a sheet sloping up towards the hive entrance with the entrance block out. That gives them more space to move into. On the board, you tip the skep onto the sheet, running up the board, and it gives give a few solid shakes or angles to ensure that all the bees are dislodged from it, and then you can sit back and enjoy them marching up into the hive, into their new home. So the second method is simply to shape the bees directly into a hive. You've got to make sure you take all of the frames out, so you can do that into a hive, or you can do it into a nute box, and you just vigorously just one solid shake in there, and make sure all the bees are safely in, and then you carefully insert the frames of foundation gently, and then you seal up the hive. A good thing to do is to prevent them swarming again. What you can do if you've got them in a full-size hive is you can put a queen excluder under the brood box. So you've always got to ensure that the queen is in the brood box before you do this. But you should also remember that the queen excluder should be removed after a few days. I'd recommend looking on the internet as well. I found that video from Stuart there and many others useful, just watching it. If you can't actually be out in the apiary or getting hands-on experience, then by all means search out some good videos there. They're are very useful. And other things to remember, sorry, should note that if you are collecting a swarm from a public place, or you don't know the origins of that swarm, it's a good idea to let them settle in and not feed them for a couple of days, and that means that any disease or anything like that will be worked out into the wax, and you can see the condition of the colony as well from doing that. So locations. Sometimes a swarm won't be so easy to capture, and they can choose some pretty tricky locations. Luckily, we have managed many experienced and persuasive members of the association, such as Pat Morgan, who shared her experience, or actually a call for equipment on our group WhatsApp. So just out of the blue, she asked if anyone had a bee vac. She had found a swarm in a hollow lamppost about 12 feet up. She was kind enough to share a photo of the swarm, and it played out as so. But luckily, she was able to actually rescue that swarm from the top of there. They went into that box, and the queen was in there as well. So yeah, but I've yet to have a tricky location more than a a bush. So there you go. So thank you very much. And I know this may seem like a lot of information to take in, but over time, and especially with hands-on experience and practice, it will all become clearer and more familiar. I look forward to seeing you in the apiary, and I also welcome any questions you may have. Thank you very much.